Do you compare yourself to others? Do you compare what you're knitting to what others are knitting? Do you compare how much you're knitting and the speed you're knitting at to what others are doing? I try to start all my in-person workshops with a do not compare yourself to the person sitting next to you. You're all knitting at different speeds, so just work at your own pace and ignore what everyone else are doing. And I think that's quite good advice when it comes to the knitting world and social media in general. Hello, my name is Anniken. I design knitting patterns. I teach knitting workshops online and in person, and I sell yarn through my website YarnAddict.co.uk. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. If you want to be notified every time I upload a video, please click the notification bell. So I have taken most of this post word for word. I've eliminated a couple of bits that I didn't think were necessary to what I want to talk about, but what I'm sharing I think is more or less word for word. I struggle with the quantity of knitwear people churn out. It's impressive that people can knit that fast, but to be honest, it leads to an expectation that we should all be producing piles and piles of clothes. Also, I don't understand how people have the time. I have huge respect for the productivity and skill of those creating knitted garments. However, I feel the idea of piles of knitwear at the end of the year only serves to make others feel inadequate. Thoughts? So that was most of the post. There were a couple of bits that I took out because I didn't think they were relevant. But I have a few problems with some of the assumptions made in that post and some of the questions raised by that post. So I thought we'd discuss it today. Please leave your comments and views on this below this video. If you happen to be the person who wrote this post, I'm not having a go at you personally. This is something I've heard other people say, or I've heard other people say similar things, and I've had some of these things said to me. So I'm not having a go at you if you were the person who wrote this post. So please don't take that personally, but just this kind of sentiment in general, I thought it'd be interesting to discuss in today's video. When I first read this post, I read some of the comments and I made a comment as well. And a lot of the replies were along the lines of, why are you comparing yourself to others, and just kind of stay in your own lane, do your own thing. The main point I want to make is, why are you comparing yourself to others, and who are you comparing yourself to? Do you compare yourself to others? Do you look at somebody on social media or YouTube channel and think, oh, they've knitted a sweater in 2 weeks. How on earth do they do that? Or they seem to have a lot of time to knit every day. How do they do that? Don't they have anything else going on in their lives? It is easy to see what others are doing and compare ourselves. I do it too. I see what other designers are doing and I compare myself to them. I see other designers being published in certain publications or having certain number of followers or likes on social media, and I feel inadequate. So we all do that, but I try very hard not to compare myself to others. At the end of the year, a lot of knitters, whether they are YouTubers or bloggers or just have a social media account, will do like a roundup of what they knitted in the last year. And sometimes it can be like, I knitted 10 sweaters, 20 pairs of socks, 10 shawls, 5 baby cardigans, you know, whatever. They'll reel it off. And sometimes you think, oh wow, that sounds like a lot. But you've got to make sure that you compare like for like. So I'm a professional knitter. I design knitting patterns as a job. I also teach knitting workshops as a job. And that means that I have a lot of time to knit. If you design knitting patterns, unless you're going to get somebody else to do all your knitting for you, you do have to knit a reasonable amount every day. If I only knitted for an hour every day, I would find producing knitting patterns to be very slow, because the longest part of producing a knitting pattern is to do the actual knitting. And I do use sample knitters as well, so I don't do all my own knitting, but I do a big chunk of it myself. So I think it's important to remember who you're comparing yourself to. And comparing yourself to me is not a good idea, because this is my job and I do this as a full-time job. I do very little housework. I spend most days at home, apart from walking the dog every day and running errands. I do teach workshops, but I don't have a very good social life. It's probably not a great thing. And it's definitely gotten worse since the pandemic and not gone back into the old swing of things. But even before the pandemic, because I work from home, I can't sit and work on the computer all day. I have to take breaks. When I take a break, I'll pick up my needles and knit for half an hour or an hour. And I do stop work relatively early every day and knit. So I don't have another job to go to, for example. And I don't meet people for coffee or lunch multiple times a week. And I don't socialise a lot in the evenings either. The only thing I do is go out and walk the dogs every day. And I also, at the age now where my kids have left home, so it's just me and my husband here, and he works from home. He actually does a lot of the housework and cooking at the moment, which gives me more time to knit. And even when I did used to do the housework, I was probably fairly relaxed about the housework and didn't spend as much time doing the housework as I probably should have done. I also knit very fast, and everything I knit is designed by me. That means that when I cast on for something, I've already written the pattern and thought about that pattern and decided what I'm doing. So I don't have to spend time reading through the pattern and try and work out what things mean, try and work out what techniques I need to know and all that kind of stuff. That probably takes the average knitter a bit of time every time they cast on for a new pattern. A lot of it is kind of in my head already because I've spent time writing the pattern and thinking about what I wanted to do. I also knit very fast. I am a very fast knitter, partly because of this way I knit, I think, continental style, but I'm also quite fast for a lot of continental knitters. And I think that's probably partly because for the last 15 or so years, I've done a lot of knitting. So I do knit fast. So comparing your output to my output is probably not a good idea. I used to always say I knit every time I sit down. That's not strictly true, but I knit more or less every time I sit down. I filmed the video, which has not been out on YouTube yet when I record this, but it will hopefully be out before this video, I think, where for a whole week I recorded every time I sat down to knit. So I had put the timer on my phone. Every time I sat down to knit, I pressed start, and every time I stopped to pick up my phone to scroll on social media or do anything else, I paused it, and every time I got up to do something, I paused it. So I got a fairly accurate idea how much I knit in a week, and I can't remember how many hours that was, but it wasn't as much as I thought it was. So before that, if you'd asked me how much do you knit a day, which is a question I get quite regularly, I would have said, well, I knit for about half an hour mid-morning, then I knit for about an hour at lunchtime, and then I usually sit down between 3 and 4. At the moment it's about 4, and I knit till dinner, which is about 6, and then I knit for most of the evening. Turns out that I don't always knit at lunchtime. Sometimes it might just be 15-20 minutes. That half an hour break in the morning, because I quite often pick up my phone and scroll through Twitter and things, that's sometimes 15 minutes, not half an hour, and sometimes I don't pick up my knitting at all. And those 2 hours I do in the afternoon, kind of between 4 and 6, sometimes there was one day I only knitted for half an hour. So I spent an hour and a half scrolling on social media, which is just terrible. So I don't knit as much as I thought I did, but that week was a little bit of an eye-opener, and I'm trying to pick up my phone less now and do more knitting, especially this week because I have some stuff I need to finish. The week I recorded myself, I didn't have a deadline, didn't have anything I had to finish that week, so it was a little bit of a different week really. But I do knit quite a lot every day. I've often had people say to me, especially when I knit in public, often strangers have said this, but sometimes friends as well, they quite often say, I wish I had time to knit. A post on Reddit said, I also don't understand how people have the time. So you're making quite a big judgment there about what people spend their time on. And what we spend our time on varies. I have a friend who says that she doesn't have time to knit very often. And I have not been to her house for quite a few years, but I have been to her house quite a few times in the past. And there were times when I would sit down and knit, and she would just be like faffing around, quite frankly. You know, she would be like making drinks, but then she'd like wipe a bit of worked up there, then she'd do something with her dogs, and then she'd do a bit of this and a bit of that. And she just wasn't getting anything done. And I'd be like, why don't you sit down and drink your coffee and do a bit of knitting? But she would just be doing stuff but not actually achieving anything. And I think a lot of people do that. So when you are doing stuff, are you actually achieving anything? And do the stuff that you need to do. Is this stuff that you need to do? So obviously I'm in a position where my kids have left home, so it's just me and my husband here, and he works from home. Things were different when I had kids at home, especially when they were younger, and I had to take them to school every day and pick them up every day, and then take them to after school things, swimming, ballet, all that kind of stuff, and then get them ready for bed and get their meals ready. And there was a lot more going on, so there was less time for knitting back then. But now they're no longer at home, I have a lot more time for knitting, and my day is my own. I decide how I spend my day. I don't have any other caring responsibilities. I don't have elderly parents who live locally. I don't have grandchildren yet, hopefully one day. So I do have a lot of time to choose how I spend that time. I also suffer from chronic health problems, including chronic pain, and that means that I can't be doing stuff all the time because I end up in too much pain. So if I'm like in the kitchen just like doing stuff without actually doing anything, I tend to quite often get back pain. So I do tend to kind of like sit down, whereas I think some people will just be doing stuff just to be doing stuff and they're not actually doing anything. You know what I'm saying? So I do tend to not do that and sit down instead. A lot of people will be on their phones, and I must admit I spend a lot of time on my phone. I do scroll social media more than I should, but a lot of people play a lot of games on their phones. So if you're saying I don't have time to knit, but then you might spend half an hour playing a game on your phone. I must admit lately I'm becoming a little bit obsessed with playing Tetris on my phone. That's one of my favorite games. The only two games I have on my phone is Tetris and Solitaire, and I have been stopping in the afternoon and putting my knitting down and playing Tetris once or twice, especially if I'm tired and I'm struggling to concentrate on my knitting. I will sometimes pick up my phone and play Tetris. Well, some people seem to spend their whole time scrolling on their phone when they sit down, whereas I tend to pick up my knitting and knit. When we were out last weekend, we went to a National Trust property nearby, and I had my knitting in my bag, and we went to the coffee shop. And while Simon was getting our drinks and cake, I did a bit of knitting. And then while we were sitting there drinking our drink and eating our cake, I did a bit of knitting. So I didn't get much done, but I got a few rounds done on my sock. So that's the thing, look for different pockets of time during the day where you can fit in some knitting. Do you have to pick kids up from school? Does that involve driving there and parking up and sitting in the car for 15 minutes to wait for them to come out? That used to be something I had to do if I wanted to pick my daughters up from their primary school in the car, because it got very busy near the school. So if you wanted to park near the school, you had to get there early. So sometimes I would get there and I'd sit in the car for like 20 minutes. Well, if I was in that situation now, I think I'd probably just put a sock project in my car, and every time I was stuck in the car somewhere, I'd pick it up and knit. Do you commute to work by public transport? Can you knit on public transport? Does somebody else drive you to work? Can you knit in the car? I was going to say, if you're stuck in the traffic jam on the way to work, can you knit while you are stuck in the traffic jam? But I'm not sure that it's a good idea to pick up your knitting if you're sitting at the driving wheel, even if you are not moving. So don't ignore I said that, because I've never done that. Actually, I don't think I've ever done that. Do you work full-time, part-time? Do you not work at all? Do you have children? How old are they? Do you have caring responsibilities? Do you have other hobbies? How much housework, cooking, childcare, running errands, all that kind of stuff? How much of that do you do? And can you streamline any of that? So do you need to clean the bathroom every day? My grandmother used to do that. Can you do it every other day or twice a week? Once a week? Do you need to iron absolutely everything? You need to iron your nighties and your underwear and your bed sheets and your tea towels. You need to dust every week, or can you do it every other week? Look at things that you're doing that you maybe not need to do every single day, and see if that will free up some time to spend knitting or your other favourite hobby, whatever that is. How often do you pop to the shops? How often do you pop into town to run errands? And how long do these errands take? And can you fit those? Can you do those things less often? A friend of mine who quite often used to complain that she didn't have enough time to knit. Her local town is probably like 20 minutes drive from where she lives, because she lives in quite a rural area. But she didn't like her local town that much, so she quite often go to the next town, which is about 45 minutes drive each way. Now, if you're talking about driving there 45 minutes, maybe an hour running errands, and then 45 minutes back, you're talking about 2.5 hours. I mean, that's like half a day. And she would do that like quite often 3 or 4 days a week. So I was like, well, no wonder you don't have any time. Why do you do all this driving back and forth? I live in a town on the outskirts of a small town. So for me to pop into town to run errands takes me a few minutes in the car. Probably should walk, but I do drive most of the time. And it only takes me a few minutes in the car. So if I leave home, pop into town to go to the post office, chemist, things like that, maybe the small co-op in town, things like that, it would normally only take me like half an hour. If I'm doing several things, maybe 40-45 minutes. But most of the things that I do is in my local town. So my post office, the bank, the small supermarket, the pharmacy I go to, the doctor I go to, the hairdressers I go to, the dentist I go to, everything is within just a few minutes drive of my house. So obviously I don't spend a lot of time driving places because most of the stuff I do is local to me. And I do think that a lot of people, obviously it depends on where you live, and that may not be something you can change, but can you run errands closer to home so you spend less time running errands? So that was a bit of kind of time management advice, really. If someone appears to be churning out 4 sweaters every time you're one sweater, what yarn are they using? Are they using chunky yarn? Are they a size 10? Are you using 4-ply yarn, and are you a size 20, for example? Things like that. You do have to compare like to like. So I knit, I rarely knit with anything thicker than a DK yarn. I got into a habit of mostly using 4-ply yarn for my magazine designs, and this year I made a conscious effort to use more DK yarn because I do realize that it's a little bit quicker to knit. So there have been times when I've submitted a design for a submission deadline where I've looked at the pattern and garment deadline and thought, I'm really busy at that time, I better submit something in a DK yarn rather than 4-ply yarn, so it'll be quicker for me to knit it. So, but I don't like knitting with anything thicker than a DK, so I rarely use that. But a lot of people like chunky yarn because it knits up quickly. Are you a size 10 or are you a size 24? It makes a big difference. Your size makes a big difference in how quickly it takes to knit something. I can knit a DK size 10 sweater with sort of, that's kind of, hang on, that is kind of easy to moderate in difficulty level in 2 weeks. I prefer to spend 3 weeks doing it because then I can relax a bit more, but I have knitted a DK sweater size 10 in 2 weeks. So for me, that's doable. That may not be doable for everyone. So you need to kind of make sure you're comparing like to like. Another thing that this post said was people are churning out piles and piles of knitwear and it's too much. And I think there was something in the post which I didn't copy about, you know, are people just getting rid of it? Obviously, I don't think it's a good idea to knit loads of stuff and they get rid of it. I do have regular sample sales, and I've also given a lot of sweaters to charity shops over the years because but my knitting is not just producing knitting for me. If I was just knitting for myself, I would not be knitting the same things I'm knitting now, and I wouldn't be producing the same amount because I do use sample knitters. So if I was doing all the knitting, there would be less knitting. And if this wasn't my full-time job, I'd probably have another job, probably not full-time because of my health problems, but I would have a part-time job, so that would mean I could spend less time knitting. But what's too much? Who makes the decision about what's too much? If I want to knit 10 sweaters a year for myself, who's to say that that's too much? In 2020, I set myself a challenge to knit 20 pairs of socks, so not 20 single socks, 20 pairs of socks. I actually ended up knitting 22 pairs of socks. 2 of those pairs were for my, I think it was new versions of my, or new samples of my creme brulee and creme caramel patterns, but I can't remember. But 2 of them were like samples for display, or it might have been my Aventuras pattern, I can't remember. Probably was Aventuras, I think. I may have knitted a couple for my daughters and a couple for my husband, but most of them were for me. Do I need 20 pairs of socks? Probably not, although I do wear hand knitted socks every night as my feet get very cold. But I also had a bit of a washing machine mishap during that year. and I managed to ruin several pairs of socks because my washing machine wouldn't drain, and I kept spinning it and rinsing it and spinning it, and I ended up felting and ruining quite a few pairs of socks. So that year I probably actually did need to knit 20 pairs of socks. I do have a lot of socks, but what I do is I wear them every night. I do wear the same pair several nights in a row, so usually about 3 or 4 nights in a row probably, unless they look dirty. And then I put them in the washing basket, but I don't wash them till I have quite a big pile of them. So I probably wash socks about every 3 to 4 weeks, I think. When my drawer is empty, I do a load of sock washing. So I'm not washing them every week. So that means that because I'm washing them less, I need more socks. But it also means rather than doing a load of washing with like 3 pairs of socks in, I'm doing a load of washing with like 15 pairs of socks in. So that's another reason why I need a lot of socks. Plus I like knitting socks, and I like knitting them for myself, although I did knit a pair for my husband recently, but I do like knitting socks for myself because a lot of the yarn I have is yarn that I bought because I like it. So therefore the socks end up being for me. I have a lot of shawls. I've knitted a lot of shawls over the years, way more shawls than anyone can ever need. But I don't just knit shawls because I want to knit a shawl and I want to wear a shawl. For a long time I was churning out, and I'm using the word churning, I was knitting several shawls a year because I wanted to produce shawl patterns, because there was quite a long period that was the best selling pattern category on Ravelry. I don't know what it is now. I know Ravelry used to produce like a sort of list every year of what type of patterns were selling best, and for years and years and years it was shawls that were selling best. I don't know what the current situation is because I haven't seen any of those kind of statistics from Ravelry for a while, but I know that for a long time shawls were the best selling thing. So I would have a shawl on the go almost all the time, and as a result I do have a lot of shawls. Even though I have sold a few and given a few away, I'd still have way more shawls than any single person can need. But I think when it comes to knitting, it's not just about the end result, what we end up with. It's also about the process of knitting. So I enjoy knitting. I don't mind the fact that I'm knitting something that's going to go off the magazine as a size 10 and it's never going to fit me. I'm knitted stuff for young companies that they keep, and I don't ever get the sample back. That doesn't bother me because I just enjoy the process of knitting it. Whether I can wear the end result or not is less important to me than the act of knitting. And I think a lot of people just enjoy the knitting, and being able to wear the end result may not be as important to them, whereas other people really want that sweater or shawl or hat or whatever it is, and the end result is the most important thing to them. It just depends on how you view knitting and why you are knitting. But how do you decide what's too much? I think your knitting output and what you knit and who that is for, then that's your business. If the quantity that other people knit stresses you out, then that is your problem, not their problem. If me knitting 20 sweaters a year is making you feel inadequate, then that's not really my problem. That is your problem. You need to stop comparing yourself to other people and focus on what you're doing. Stay in your own lane, do your own thing, and not kind of compare yourself to what other people are producing. And who are you to judge? Or who are we to judge? I get that if someone knits chunky acrylic sweaters just so they can show it on social media and they don't wear it and then they just put it in the bin, that is a problem because that's adding plastic basically to landfill size, and that is a problem. If they knit it and they don't like it and they give it to a charity shop, that's different. My mum has quite a few sweaters that she's knitted that she's not wearing, partly I think because she tends to knit them out of wool, and she's very, very sensitive to wool, and because she's tiny they don't fit anyone else. So I have said to her, stop knitting stuff in wool, but wool is the easiest available fibre in Norway. And when I was there a couple of years ago maybe, she knitted a stranded colourwork circular yoke sweater in cotton yarn, and it didn't look as nice as if she knitted in wool, because wool, it kind of evens out the fabric more and it just looks nicer with stranded colourwork. So she wasn't 100% happy with it. Let me know what your thoughts are on the issues we've discussed. I think this video is a bit longer than I'd intended it to be. But if you think that other people are producing too much knitting or crochet or sewing or whatever it is, and you think what they're doing with it all, well, you don't know, maybe they're knitting for charity, maybe they give it away, maybe they're knitting for family members. Who cares? None of anyone else's business. If you think, how do they have time to knit so much, then people have very different circumstances. There, when I first got back into knitting, as I shared in a recent video where I kind of share my knitting and design story, when I first got back into knitting, I wasn't doing a lot of other stuff because of health problems. So I did sit in the middle of the day when my kids were at school for several hours and knit every day because that was all I could do at the time. So you've got to think about that as well. A lot of knitters have health problems. A lot of knitters are disabled because knitting is a hobby that you can do with quite a lot of disabilities. So I think that's why it does appeal with to a lot of people who have like mobility issues and things like that. So if people seem to be churning out a lot of knitting, don't worry about it. Stay in your own lane, do your own thing, focus on you. So let me know in the comments, do you compare yourself to others? Do you think other people knit too much, produce too much stuff? Do you wonder how they have time to knit? Let me know in the comments what your opinion on these issues are. Thank you very much for watching. I'm sorry the video got a bit long, but I really appreciate you sticking with me. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time.